episode, Prophecy for the Last Hour, Liz McGee. So I am doing a teaching series. I just started last week on the kingdom of HaShem, the kingdom of God, after having completed a 3-part series on the kingdom of Hasatan, the kingdom of the God of this world. All right. Now, as I get into this, it's just, to me, I get overwhelmed very easily by the volume of information and the volume of knowledge and wisdom and trying to piece this thing back together. So it is hard for me to articulate linearly or in a coherent fashion sometimes, because, hey, I'm learning and trying to put it together, and I'm just trying to put out there understanding. But I was sort of stopped dead in my tracks again, because, how do I even say this? I think I'm going to get myself in a lot of trouble today. I guess that's what I could. There's a potential for stirring the pot, which I guess I need to do, because so much of the way I see and the best way to say this is Ephraimite teachers trying to put together the deeper meaning of scriptures, which is very, oh my goodness, look at that. I was just disappearing for a minute. If you don't have a true foundation, if you're not building on the right foundation, the house isn't going to work. It's just not going to work. You're not going to have the doors in the right place. You're not going to have the windows in the right place, whatever. That's the analogy. And I see this happening. And I see this happening in this whole debate, okay, so I'm going to get in trouble, of the flat earth. And is the world, because a lot of the way the words are being interpreted are so still not, in my opinion, okay, unbiblical. It's like we're not getting anywhere, all right? So let me just try to unpack as best as I can my understanding from the ancient sources, from the texts themselves, the keys to the kingdom, the correct allegorical and parabolical way in which these things need to be interpreted so we can get to the correct understanding. Because, like I've said this many times, we're in a propaganda war. If you don't have the right information, you're not going to get the right outcome. That's basic. So our propaganda war, what I was starting to, one of my presuppositions always, is that we are in a time prophetically of the reunification of all Israel, that the people of Elohim on the planet today, those that are dead and wherever they are in paradise or waiting, are in 2 houses, the house of Judah and the house of Ephraim. Okay, it's very well established, and the 2 of them have 2 messiahs. All right, this is all part of the big picture here. I'm trying to teach Messiah ben David, Messiah ben Joseph, what that means, and why it has not understanding these pieces of the puzzle has led to such a separation, which, again, in its worst carnality, always leads to violence and bloodshed and, name calling and separation, all the disunity, that the opposite of what HaShem wants, which is unity, which is a chad. So let me just say this. What I started to shock him is there's a verse in Isaiah 11:13. It says, "And the envy of Ephraim shall cease. The adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and nor shall Judah vex Ephraim." Now, I told you that Rashi, who's a great sage of the Middle Ages, nobody denies it. He said, Ephraim shall not envy Judah, that this refers to the Messiah, Judah's Messiah, Messiah ben David, and the Messiah, the son of Joseph, which is the Messiah to get the 10 lost tribes, the incarnation of this prophetic messiahship in the world, to gain entrance again for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and any goyim that want to attach themselves to this, just like, paralleling the first Exodus, that this Messiah ben Joseph, shall not envy each other. The harmony and cooperation between Messiah ben David and Messiah ben Joseph signifies the total unity of all Israel. The Israel of God, which I said, the firstborn, the elect. All right, this is so important. Removing the historical rivalries between the tribes of Judah and Joseph is what will bring in the final restoration. Okay, now, against that backdrop, in this propaganda war, so you have, and this is what I keep going back and forth between the propaganda in the house of Judah and the propaganda in the house of Ephraim, or the propaganda amongst the Jews and the propaganda amongst the Christians. It's like, oh my gosh, are we ever going to make the crooked places straight again? But praise Yahweh, we will. So this, what I just quoted about the harmony and the cooperation, is quoted in two parts of the Talmud, in the Bereshit Rabbah and the Torah Shelama. I mean, this is not unknown, and many of your deeper sages and have known this. But we have a formidable enemy, the kingdom of HaSatan. Unfortunately, he's the god of this world. He controls a lot of the airwaves, the information that passes to us. All right. Okay, so I just want to set that precedence that the two houses need to deeply study each other's texts, get a very big and broad understanding of what the other is saying, and then synthesize it. All right, and through the Ruach, we will come into harmony. This is the whole point. The one new man will come into unity. There'll be one Lord, one Adonai. There will be one faith. There will be one Yahweh Elohim over this. All right, so this is where we're going. Now, in terms of, so this is what I'm saying. In terms that I got into some flat earth stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't take it anymore. I can't take people trying to figure out what the pillars of the earth are, that the earth rests on pillars, which is such a bad translation, and again making the same mistake that, okay, this is my opinion. All right, so let's try to go into some of this understanding. Because like I said, I'm not making this up. The keys of the kingdom are already established. I've said this a minute. The house of Judah does have the oracles and they do have within their writings clear and concise locked down ways in which these oracles and the parabolic is to be established, and you can't make it up. Unfortunately, many Jews are just like many Christians. They're nominal. They don't know their text. They don't respect it. They are not Berean, whatever. I'm not going to. Okay, so I've been reading a lot. Philo. Now, Philo was a first century, Philo Judaeus, first century philosopher. Lived in Alexandria. All right, but it is interesting that the works of Josephus and Philo have been preserved for us as much as some of the biblical, as any other works of the ancient world. And it's not, it praise Yahweh that has happened. And he had a hand, obviously, in this, because we need both sides of that coin, the history versus the philosophy. We live in a world today where we are totally divorced. We don't understand the need, and we are not schooled in it, and we don't have the proper tools to understand how philosophy and theology are actually, it's like Aramaic and Hebrew, total twins. You cannot have one without the other. So in order to enter into the dialect at all, you have to have the correct philosophical foundation in how a lot of these theological concepts are to be interpreted. Okay? Now, there is, just let me start, I'm going to screen share a couple things, because again, there are some primary, and again, a lot of this information, it's not salvational issues. Yes, I mean, if you're an Ephraimite, yes, Yashua is the door. Get into the house through him. Okay, fine. All right. But the point is, you're not supposed to stop there. You're supposed to keep climbing the ladder, so to speak. You're supposed to grow, continue in wisdom and knowledge. Unfortunately, most Christians, we don't understand today that the whole point of salvation is to get wisdom and to get knowledge. It's hard because I can't keep fleshing out everything I say. So anyways, but to Judah, to be righteous, to be a Torah-keeping, righteous, believing, all right? These are, you can't get away from these things. And I'm not, but they're, so I'm just trying to build on the foundation that has been laid, all right? Now, so there is a concept called the tree of life. Now, the tree of life is, I've spoken a lot on this, and I tell you people again, if you need to learn how to have discernment and get your wisdom and information from Orthodox, authentic, Jewish sites, all right? Because again, we have a formal enemy who dresses up all of this wisdom and knowledge and a lot of bells and whistles. You can put whatever name you want on it, New Age or magic or whatever you want to call it, all right? But you need to learn how to distinguish information and its root system, all right? That's a primary tool that is necessary, all right? And you just can do it without fear, because greater is he or she, let's say the Ruach HaKodesh that is in us, the gift that we've been given, this gift of discernment to help us lead the way. So you don't have to be afraid, you just have to be vigilant, careful, keep your passions and do not have too many presuppositions or be too dogmatic or fundamental, just go with the flow, so to speak. All right, so I want to share this thing. Now, this is my jumping off point, because you need to understand in this concept of the tree of life. This is a theological concept that the ancients had, and believe me, this is in all the cultures, because the premise I have is that the Jews, when they were the head and not the tail, or let me say it this way, when Israel, in its glory days of kingdom, especially under David and Solomon, had the greatest philosophers, the greatest everything, and they were a world kingdom. Even Abraham, it's established, Shem, Enoch, the patriarchs, let me call this the mountains, the pillars, in one sense, the most foundational go-to sources for truth that we have. Our Bible, written by people like Isaiah and the book of Enoch coming back to us, that whole understanding. Or you get into, Yashua, just the words of Jesus. These are foundational. But this tree of life is in many cultures, but the Jews have kept the systematic theology of this, in my opinion, the cleanest. Not perfect, but the cleanest. All right, so what we have here, this is a philosophical concept of how our text is written, and it's telling us that the world that Elohim created, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. He created this concept, this tree of life. All right, so we're not talking about one little tree. It gets into the tree of the knowledge of good, and it gets into the tree of life, all this. But what you have here is everything in this totality has purpose, placement, function, unity, and individual parts. See, this is it. So you have a root system. And the first thing we just say is you start with the seed. Everything gets planted in a seed of life. All right, so these are concepts, because when Yahweh spoke, that was like the seed, that was the first thing, and let there be, the beginning of this process. So we're planting, Yahweh Elohim is planting a cosmos, and it's going to be very large with then very populated, all these things. But the point is, it has a root system, it has a trunk, it has branches, and it has leaves. It has visible parts to it, which you can see, and it has tons of invisible parts you can't see. So all of this is important in trying to know what we can know, because everything that's been given to us by Elohim, this tree of life concept, is for us and for our children, for all posterity. All right. Unfortunately, we live in an age and epoch where we are so divorced now from our ancient root systems, truly. But so you have a trunk. Now, And each of these, so like up here in this word, it has crown in the leaves. Now, like I've said, this has many applications. There are endless layers, nuanced meanings to all of this. Okay, so I'm kind of sticking with one parabolic understanding today, and no one is saying that, and I follow parts, so I'm not saying there's not literal trees out there, right? But in terms of the philosophy of what our texts are telling us, it is based on this concept of a tree of life. Now, this is a cross section of a trunk. And let me establish this here first. This whole tree is what is called Adam Caveman. This tree is what Paul is referring to. This theological picture is what Paul is referring to, and he calls it the body of Christ. Same animal, same tree, same thing, all right? Just different writers kind of spinning it in their own language a little bit, all right? But they're talking about the same thing. In this cross section of the trunk, you have this, it's called the pith, this dark center in the middle. This would be called, okay, so in the tree of life, now if you were to take this, and this is what our sages have done, this is what it means when you grow in Torah, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, and you learn how these applications build upon themselves, layer upon layer upon layer. Now I'm going to come back to this. I wonder if I should do this now or later. All right, let me just stick here. There is the pillar. Let me just say, we know that I've talked about it, the left side and the right side. Our Bible talks about this. These kind of concepts are in there. We need them to, and then the middle pillar, all right? The middle pillar is here, all right? The middle pillar is a place, it is called peace. It is called shalom. This is the place in the middle of Yav, Hey, Vav, Hey. This, I can't even, there's so many. This gets into the Sephirithic tree of life. So take this concept. Let's put it on this now. Okay, hold on. I know what I got to do. We got to get out of that. We got to go to here. All right. Now, this can scare a lot of people, but you've got to learn to grow up. You take this tree of life I just showed you with its roots and its branches and its leaves and its trunk. You put it on top of the human body, which I told you is what Paul is talking about with the body of Christ, what the Jews are talking about in Adam Caveman, all right? At the same time, we are not in a literal sense, and we are not even talking about, how do I say this? We're still in a whole world of theology, philosophy, but what I'm trying to tell you, this is established understanding. So when we talk about the arms of, Yahweh in his right arm, and he did something with his right hand, and he did something with he walks about, when he walked in the garden in the cool of the day, or when he talks about his judgment, he is going to send forth his angels of chastening. These things all can be plugged into and sort of emanate to this whole concept of a Sephirithic tree of life, all right? And each one of these is housed with tremendous thought through, how to explain it. All right, but what I wanted to say here, when we're talking about the tree of life, there's two really important divisions that immediately need to be established. And that is what we call, that's why 7 and 3 are such important numbers. 7, which is known as the lower Sephiroth, under the top 3. So crown, understanding, wisdom. I have talked about this. Chokmah, Bina, and Keter, all right, synthesized together. And these are outside of, okay, this is important, are outside of this concept of what you can see. All right, now the lower 7. All right, so let me go back to this other screen share. Because, all right, let me say this other thing. Because the world, the 5-dimensional universe I've talked, you got to understand the 5 levels of the soul, the different dimensions of the different worlds. There are 4. There's 5, but for our intents and purposes, you know, some of this is so beyond the human mind, you're never going to figure it out. So they will stick with 4 worlds, because this, we can at least begin to wrap our minds around these concepts, all right? But the world of Asiya, which is the lowest world, which is the world where our nephesh soul life functions from, operates from, that is the programs of this whole computer, which is down here by the feet, all right? This is the feet of the thing. Our nephesh soul, we got boots on the ground. We're people who live in a physical world, all right? These are the concepts. So when you talk about height and depth, east, west, north, and south, up, top, above and below, you're all geographically talking about relations. So the relationship between the crown, between the head, the mind, and the feet, all right? But the most important thing to understand, it's still a unity, all right? This, to me, even, okay, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, what we can know about God, the first principle, Adonai Echad, it's a unity, our body, okay? This is fundamental. I got hands and feet and a head and a mouth that all do different things, but it's still one body. We're still talking about one tree of life, all right? So this is foundational to understand, because let me share my last point where I'm going in, because if you don't understand these ancient principles, which, yes, I mean, certain cultures and groups on the planet pervert it, oh, well, you know what? Their demise is really coming soon. Okay, see this? You're going to end up making the cosmology look like this, Yahweh's terrarium. And because people don't understand what the pillars are referring to, you know, I've seen so many of these, you know, trying to put pillars under a picture of the earth, and I'm like, oh my gosh, all right? You cannot take a mystical understanding. Let me put it this way. The mystical understanding is already established. So scratch this. This is not going to be helpful. The world is fixed and not moving, spinning, orbiting. These arguments are not coming from a full deck, all right? That's why I believe I am beginning to come to the conclusion, and I'm sorry, this is my opinion, don't hate me, I'm trying the best I can ever to understand this, but I know for a fact that much of the usage of the words by the flat is not being properly applied in the total theology that Enoch and these people are giving us. All right, I know that for a fact because I know how the words are used theologically. And circular with edges, corners, pillars, and foundations, we are not talking about a physical hard-edged structure. That's not what we're talking about. All of these are used words in relationship to worlds that are visible and invisible. All right, and then under a dome within which the sun, moon, and stars were placed on day 4. Yes, I mean, some of this is true, but so much, oh my gosh, so much of the backdrop of the understanding is not even on the radar of a lot of people. The argument, in my opinion, is not whether the earth is flat or is round. The argument is whether it is geocentric or heliocentric. That is absolutely paramount to this issue. But the other piece of the puzzle is, let me say, because the argument is not, and I'll just state this right now, the flat earth, I think it's a psyop, a whole setup, because both camps and the flat earth camp are sticking with literal level understandings that are not incorporating the deeper remez, drash, or sod level understandings. And so so to me, it's destined to fail, because it's like Hassan always sets up a duality that he can then come in and crush. All right, two sides against each other. And so this is, to me, a complete, it's not going to, while it, of course, everything can work together, everything can bear fruit in a certain extent, but ultimately, this is not the picture that our texts are painting. All right. So when you are talking about a flat earth versus a round earth, what is being described in art, and that's just like not even the question to be asking. The question is, what does the earth represent theologically? All right. We're not talking, when the text uses the word earth, the flat earth refers to the world of Asiya. All right. That is the physical world. That's what it refers to. Soup to nuts. Everything that is in the physical world that we have the eyes to see, the ears to hear about, whatever, the hands to work with, the mouth to eat the produce of it, whatever. These things in the physical world, this is what it's talking about with earth. When it says it's in a plane, it's in a plane, it's an energy field, it is a slice, so to speak, of the whole pie. It is the visible part with the earth. All right, and I'm going to go into a lot of texts, ancient, and explain this. But the question comes back to: is this slice of the pie, this physicality, this world of Asiya, is it geocentric or heliocentric? Because that really is more of the issue. So, because if it's surrounded by an ice wall, these things, we've got to understand. Let me say this: the words like ice and fire and clouds, and the way these words are used, these are words that are talking about invisible living species that are all part of running this cosmos. Like I said, this is a part we don't understand, because if you are dealing in the world of Asiya, and this is what I want to get to next, you are totally denying 9/10 of the creation. All right. This is the trap that when you are a carnal minded person, you fall into. All right. Now let me just see. There are 3 things in the tree that are outside of the tree. All right. You got to take this soil. All right. Here, let me go back to this, because I guess I'm going to get myself into so much trouble. This, let's get rid of that. Let's go back to this. This tree represents what is known in the seven is the lower 7. Okay. But what's outside of this tree is the soil, the sunlight, and the water, which are absolutely necessary for this tree to even have a chance of flourishing. This is why the whole concept of the 10 Sephirithic tree of life concept has to be understood, because until you can tap into what in one way you could call the soil, the sunlight, and the water in which this seed of life, this seed of a tree was planted in, you're just can't even, this thing can't grow. All right. And what we talks about, the soil, the sunlight, and the water, these are forces, these are high. All right, let me put it this way. This is the highest, purest, most highest heavens, right? So they would be referring to this as the highest heavens, where the throne of Yahweh is completely untouched, completely pure, completely sealed off, cut off, nothing unholy, unclean, no darkness can get there, all right? And that is referring to Keter and Chokmah and Bina. It's referred to as the Abba and Ima, the Heavenly Mother and the Heavenly Father. And so this is a concept that has to be understood. So even though you have a tree, which is known as the lower 7, that's why in the ancient world, you will always see they have this thing about the 7 planets with 7 colors, with 7, 7 is such a big number. You see this all over the iconography. That's right. of a lot of what we see all over ancient archaeology in many cultures. It's because this tree, this can be known, this is seen, this can be probed inside and out. Now that we have microscopes today, all right, we can see all the processes that are going on inside these leaves and inside this trunk, and we have an understanding of how the root system in the soil is getting nutrients, and it's going all the way up that tree, and it's, you know, producing these green leaves, and then it, okay, so this is something that now, and I have more the opinion, you know, this, I think the ancients had totally this understanding, even more so because they could read the heavens. They had so much more understanding than we do, in my opinion, because a lot of information has been lost, contrary to what they want to tell you today, all right? So this tree has to be understood in terms of this will show you all the lower seven sephirothic, which is a word, the emanations, the forces, the whole manifestation of the three worlds that we, like I said, we interact with constantly in terms of our soul life. This is all programs, you know, our nefesh, our ruach, and our neshama. And then there's two higher ones, and the two higher ones really are coming down and emanating from the highest wisdom and knowledge, all right? So, but there's so much information, I can't give it all. But what I have to stress, this is a theology that is in our text. This is what your prophets knew, your sages knew. This is what Judah, the really initiated sages, and even in Christianity, there have always been initiated people who have had this knowledge and understanding. Why it's been kept such, well, sort of in a lockdown by both camps, you know, of course, and we're in a war, Satan knowledge is power. I get a lot of it, but it's time for all of this understanding to come together, come out in the open. All right, so let me say that. So now, when you get into this concept of this tree of life, all right, the words, there's a lot of words that are used to reference different parts of it, with that are doing different processes, all right? But I've established that there's a lower seven, there's three above. This is within a confines of 10. There is, so when you say, okay, so when I said in the world of Asiya is the world that the earth, when you use the word earth, it refers to physicality. That's sort of the boots on the ground. The feet are in the world. Our feet are in the world of Asiya, okay, the physical world. My mind, though, is not confined totally to what, this is why the whole concept of imagination. I can go beyond what I see in here. I can go into worlds, thought, you know, the whole point, and this is the whole point, you have to understand, you know, the mind, the intellect, thoughts, you know, your emotions. I've been through a lot of this, and you have to understand then the physicality of these things, all right? This is all part and parcel of understanding, putting this together. So when in 1 Corinthians, when we are all together through Christ, so I wanted to just establish the point that Paul totally had this understanding. All right, let me do this. Philo talks about, let's start with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, all right? Because people are trying to, what's the knowledge of, what's the tree of life, what's the tree of knowledge of, what is going, this is, you have on the sephirothic concept, a middle pillar, you have a right side and a left side. The left side is known as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The right side is known as the tree, as the tree of righteousness, blessings. So in other words, it's sort of the blessings and the curses, and you have this middle thing. And when Yeshua is our peace, when Yahweh is the peace, he is always, and this is even on every level, this archetype works, because you can take, you have passive, active, and passive, and then you have neutral. In every single sense, you have this idea of a right and a left, a binary or a dualist, and you have something in the middle, all right? And that's what makes peace. Now, all right, I should just read this. And this is from Philo. Now, I want to say this, I was doing this research. I try to go back and read Philo because he really had the most astute philosophical understanding. Succinctly, when you can understand, And he wrote and incorporated a lot of like Greek. Greek would be a word used then now to understand the Gentile mind, all right, which is to a large extent the mind of also the lost sheep, all right. Now he knew this, he knew his audience, all right. So if he's going to try to reach into, to educate as a Torah scholar, a sage, people of his generation or future generations, and reach people with truth, and he knows that a lot of the house of Israel, the northern kingdom, and of all Israel is in this Greek mindset, all right? That's a given. So he, being this astute, understood their philosophies. This is the same principle as Paul. Paul knew everybody's story, everybody's theology. Isaiah the same way, Yashua the same way. These people, they totally understand who they're dealing with, who their audience is, and can speak to them in their language on their terms, all right, to try to draw their mind into truth, okay? But anyways, I was reading this text. His works have been sort of fragmented, but sort of we're at the end of the age putting it together, some Syrian translations, with a couple of different Latin translations coming together. But what they're finding out is that, like some of the early church fathers, okay, so Ambrose and Jerome, quote, this is what always happens to Judah, quote verbatim from his writings and never give him credit. See, this is why I said one of the curses upon the house of Judah right now, the fact is that their intellectual property, which is the oracles, which is Torah, which is the keys of the kingdom, which is all of the writings, be they a literal, a history, or at the sod level, the mysteries, get stolen so many times. They don't get credit, and it gets repackaged and put out there. And Elohim does not get the glory. And that is a huge problem, and that is something that we have to fix. That's part of the job of all Israel, the elect today. And people who do that, you're called a liar, and you're going to get judged for that. So whatever, that's another rabbit trail. And at this point, it's who knows. But anyways, he's saying here, what is meant by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? And he goes on to say, all right. He makes in another statement, let me just start with this. He says, and what else is meant by the tree of life? He's got a text called Interpretations or Commentaries on Genesis. He has this whole text on unpacking Genesis and all of its parabolic and allegorical language. And so I told you, just find out that Jerome and Ambrose and a lot of this is in the Christian church, and because these church fathers read these guys' works, who else would they read, right? And yet they don't really give him credit. This is part of the problem. So he says, what is meant by the tree of life? But he said, but perhaps we ought to look at these things as spoken in an allegorical sense. And this is what he first tried to tell his audience. Look at, nobody's dying, there's not real trees out there, and there's not a real world of physicality. But when you're trying to put together the cosmology of the world, including the heavens and the earth, you cannot be literal. That's what I'm telling you. You cannot be, because we are including in this picture unseen worlds. And if you can't see it, all right, seriously, you can only glean it mentally using words and language as symbols, try to pass down these archetypes. So you cannot ever lose the sight of the allegorical understanding first, because it will include, to the best of our ability, all 10 Sephirithic understandings of what we can know about Elohim. I don't know if that made sense. So he says you have to look at these things allegorically. So when you get into the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, you got to look at it somewhat allegorically, initially, so you get the big picture, the world of the mind. All right, I know a lot of people are unpacking, and I have too. Yes, there's a physical aspect to this thing, down in physicality, absolutely. But if you cannot correctly teach or paint the picture unless you can start at the top and get the total context. So he says, what then is meant by this figure of allegorical speech which is in many ways the comprehension of science. Now it's interesting, by which I'm going to read the whole thing and then I'll go back and unpack it. All right, which is the comprehension of science, by which all things are known and distinguished from one another, whether they be good and beautiful, or bad and unseemly, or in short, every sort of everything in the middle. Contrariness is discerned. All right. So we're talking about the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. Some things are good and beautiful. Some things are kind of like bad and harmful. No brainer here. All right. And it was done that way deliberately. This is something that Elohim has created. All right. Since some things belong to the better class and some to the worse. Therefore, the wisdom which exists in this world, all right, the world of Asiya, the world that I wasn't going to flush it out until I'm done, all right? Therefore, the wisdom which exists in this world is not in truth God himself, but the work of God, the work of Elohim. That it is which sees and thoroughly investigates everything. But the wisdom which exists in man sees in an incorrect and mixed manner, somewhat dark with somewhat darkened eyes. We see through a glass dimly. For it is found to be incompetent to see and comprehend clearly without alloy, each particular thing separately. Moreover, there is a kind of deception mingled with human wisdom, which is, since very often there are some shadows found which hinder the eyes from contemplating the brilliant light. That's the truth. Since what the eye is in the body, such also is the mind and wisdom in the soul. Okay, now first of all, there's so much in there, but I want to say this is where Paul comes in, because again, Paul is a master Torah sage. He totally understands this concept. This is what he is trying to tell people, and he's explaining that this is the difference between having a natural carnal mind and a mind of wisdom. We are told to get a mind of wisdom and not to have a carnal mind, especially when we're trying to incorporate and understand the spiritual dimensions or the spiritual parts of this, of life, all right? And he says, because there is a kind of deception mingled with human wisdom. And this is where Paul says, so where does this leave the philosophers, the scholars, and the world's brilliant debaters? God has made the wisdom of this world look foolish. So in other words, if you're going to be a flat earther and you're going to totally try to unpack these words from a literal level, you look foolish. I'm sorry. All right? For the wisdom of this world is foolishness before Elohim. For it is written, he is the one who catches the wise in their craftiness. That's from 1 Corinthians 1:20 and 3:19. And again, he says, the natural man, the carnal man, the world who only is seeing things through the natural eye. All right? This is the natural man. It does not accept the things that come from the spirit of Elohim. You cannot understand the dimensions you cannot see, like the soul, like the spirit, like the ruach, like the neshama, these programs that are operating, all right? They are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them because they are spiritually discerned. In other words, that's why most people today operating in this little secular box we have, that, oh my gosh, if you can't taste and touch, it doesn't exist. You can't even enter the debate. You can't even enter the dialogue. All right, seriously, from the point of view of true Torah scholars. And that's part of the problem that Judas had with us, because it's like, come on, guys, all right? But to make this point, and this is one of the important things, like I say, since some things belong to the better class, some things to the worse. Therefore, the wisdom which exists in this world is not in truth God himself, but the work of Elohim. So many times people try to explain the whole cosmos and everything that's going on, even using some of the microscopic, invisible worlds we know about in the heavens, which is still all the world of Asiya. All right? and try to divine all of the truth and answers from that. You can't do it, all right, because you're totally not incorporating. It's like, trying to make a cake with 1/3 of the ingredients, all right? You have to have the whole package. You have to have the whole theology, all right? The wisdom which we see, and not only that, but we also see through a glass darkly, because we have now the shadow, we have the evil inclination, we have all this war that goes on between truth and probably that even further clouds it and makes it difficult to understand. All right, so what my major point is to take away from that is, when Paul is talking about the wisdom of this world, we're talking about a mindset that is not willing to incorporate, really bottom line, the mysteries, the deep truth that is couched in these texts from the mystical point of view, which was the best we have to explain how this tree of life and all these processes and the parts of it, the soil, the water, and the sunlight that are all part of it too, that we can't see. All right, so that's, all right. Now, let me just go into a little bit more, he says, on the tree of life, all right? Because you need discernment, you need wisdom. Like, some things are good and some things are bad. Like, we know, and then he goes on to explain, like, we know in the plants. I mean, some plants are very beneficial, but some plants are totally poisonous. All right. And when he talks about the system of science, there is a point in the world of Asiya that finally, through trial and error, you do figure out a few things. You do get a certain system of classification down. Right, and this is what he's talking about in the comprehension of science. Yes, there are many, many, many great things that we do know because of our study of the physical world, its laws and its properties that don't change, and our ability to mix and mingle and do all sorts of stuff with it. All right, that's part of it. But that is only 1/5. If we're taking into the 5 dimensions, 1/5 of the totality of what we're talking about, okay? So when he talks about the tree of life, we said we ought to look on these things as spoken in an allegorical sense. Now this is interesting. For some say the tree of life belongs to the earth. The tree of life only, all right, now this is important, only is pertinent in the world of Asiya, okay? The world of physicality. Insomuch as it is the earth which produces everything which is of use for life. So these are some kind of how trip-ups sort of, you can have, 9/10 of the truth, but you still don't have the whole truth, all right? All right, let me read it. But friends, we have to look on these things allegorically. For some say the tree of life belongs to the earth, all right? And like I was telling you, the lower 7 Sephirithic understandings, which in a lot of the ancients they depict, you can see these iconographic kind of images of 7, like 7 planets around a central, this whole concept. It has a name, Zerapin. This is in the philosophy, in the mystical text, but they will say that it belongs to the earth because it produces everything which is of use for life, whether it be the life of a man or life of an animal, the living beings that are here, all right? God has appointed the situation. God has appointed, let me put this tree in the center of this plan. And the center of the universe is the earth. Now that is that's why I believe in a geocentric worldview. This is what's important. The center of the universe is the earth. We are the apple of his eye, the pupil he sees. When he looks, wherever Elohim is, he looks through everything and he sees us. We are the point. This is creation. So in one sense, yes, the point of everything is the physical final outcome. Like, in other words, when you plant a beautiful rose, a seed bulb, you are hoping eventually to get a beautiful rose flower. That's the whole point, so that you can gaze upon the beauty and the fragrance and the symmetry and the color and everything of that rose. Now that is the analogy that they will use of a soul. All right, the flowers and souls are used in the text allegorically to paint the same picture. So he's gazing at our soul, and he would love to see us as beautiful flowers of light, that our souls, this is the point, are just beautiful and glorious to look upon and to gaze upon, and to give, to give beauty. And if it's an herb, or if it's, if you're talking about not just a flower, but the tree of life, and they shall give off their fruits. See, these souls will give benefit. All right, that's the whole point of the world of creation, that it can have benefit. It is the final outcome for good, for then giving. See, it's all okay. But the center of the universe is the earth. All right. Now there are others who assert that what is meant by the tree of life is the center between the seven circles of heaven. All right, but some affirm that it is the sun which is meant, as that is nearly in the center between the different planets, and is likewise the cause of the four seasons, since it is owing to him that everything which exists is called into existence. All right, there's so much packed in that, because this concept of the tree of life includes not only this world of physicality, but all of the 10, it's a process, of 10 heavens, 10 spheres, 10 dimensions, 10 processes, all working together to produce. But in the middle of this, you do have, this is what's called the Mazarah. See, he put in the midst of the firmament, and I'll get into some of these words, and firmament is a word that means a separation between one dimension and another. It's just like our skin, all right? The tree is completely analogous to our body. That's again why they just put these templates one over another kind of thing. You can see me, I'm like a tree, right? And I got branches, or, my hands. I have things on the outside. But inside, who is stupid enough today to believe that there's not tons of things going on inside the body? You got organs and blood and bones and processes going on like crazy. All right? This is the same point. So, but this is where the head and the heart are absolutely the top key kind of. So when you get into the allegorical things to unpack, because they're the most important rulers, this is the point, over these processes. So it's my mind and my heart that are working together, however they do it, that are producing, that are organizing, that are orchestrating everything that this body does, this tree of life. All right, but because he goes, Philo makes another comment, he says, but whatever is in the middle is in a manner the primary cause and the beginning of things, like the leader of a chorus. So in other words, and this is where, this is what is something, because one of the things with the ancients too, again, being Helios, being geocentric, is the sun the center of this universe, this structure, and the first emanating thing, how do we say, in the lower seven, is it this? I can't, there's just too much information to have to unpack to be able to, I think, even make some of these statements. But the point is, the mind would refer to the upper three Sephiroth, the fact that I am getting, my inspiration is coming from water, from sunlight, and from soil or whatever that's outside, and then that I was planted inside the soil, and I need all those other three in order to grow and to flourish and to be. This is the concept. But the sun is so integral, and the sun truly is in the middle. A lot of people will attribute, who make, and I've done teaching, listen to my teachings on study of angels, because they have, great minds have studied this, and believe me, I'm not a great mind. I'm just trying to understand it myself, and it helps me to put it together to do these teachings. So whatever. the sun and the moon, the Mazzaroth, the Milky Way, these things, this is sort of in the middle of the whole system. So they say, well, the fourth or the fifth heaven is the realm of this dimension, made on the fourth day, all right? And the heavens were made on the fourth day, and it is the sun that is the central piece. It's sort of like Grand Central. So the upper, they whatever processes is making the sun do its thing, the sun, its processes go out and make everything else kind of exist, all right? It is the conduit for that sunlight. They will tell you there's always a light behind the light, or there's always something behind. Okay, so when it says that the tree of life is the center between the seven circles of heaven, this is something to do with the planets. This is what the ancients have been trying to tell us. This is really what is science is true, and this is where NASA could be way more truthful, and we could put this package back together. This whole system, these planetary systems within the planets, the sun, the moon, and the stars make up the Mazzaroth, which makes, I've talked about this, the Mazal, which makes up, which is like, what I could say, is the primary filter that everything above has to filter through them to get down to the earth to have influence, all right? And it's in the middle, the fourth and fifth heaven, and they're called the Elohims. And these are the gods, small g, of the nations. These are the shepherds. This is what I've been to. I have teaching. This is another huge piece of the problem, must be understood. And this is where Hasatan gets in, because again, he wants everybody to think that the sun, his place in this whole cosmos is the emanative source, when it's really not, because there are higher heavens, there are dimensions above that. And the heart is in the body unit, because the heart is like command central. Once it comes from the head, the heart is the one that this is why there's such between the heart and the head, there's so much understanding to unpack. But Yavhe Vavhe is really considered to be the heart of the matter. The Father, these are all, is the mind, the brains, the originator of the thing. I mean, these things are all interrelate, and these words have to be understood in terms of their interrelationship, interdependency, all right. So, when you see, let me just screen share this one more time, because when you look at this, let me make this point. Okay, so see this tree. This is the cross section of a trunk of the tree. So this is so interesting, because again, in here we begin to see a whole invisible world, right? And it takes in the center, and is this that runs all the way up and down, is this tight, how to explain what I want to, I'll come back. What I want to try to say is the rings, a tree rings, this is so interesting, and the bark. Okay, the bark is like the skin. So when he covered us in skin, quote unquote, he put a barrier, he enclosed us. That's why it's called, he made skin. He put over our processes, so to speak. I mean, this is very deep, a barrier between this world of Asya and all the processes that are going inside of us. All right, be that as it may. But the rings, this is indicative, and they go around in a circle. Now, there's a thing that they call tree ring science today, where you can determine the age of the earth. Every year, a tree grows to the point where it makes a new ring. So this is a whole science, and this is, again, a hotly contested science, because some of them will say one conclusion, say one thing, and others will say another thing. So there's even a propaganda war going on inside the tree ring science community. But the point is, but they're circular, and it starts from the center, And as this tree grows, these tree rings grow around and around, and they're recording time. This is why I'm telling you it's so important to understand, especially there's nothing by accident. The Hebrews believe that time is circular. It is not linear. It is Gilgal. It is spheres. It is wheels. It is turning, turning, and turning. And it is going from a conception, let's say the seed, to a final outcome that only really Yahweh knows. But the point is, these circles represent time concentrically going on, which represents the Mazarah. This is what I want to say. One of the main things to understand about this, and this is where we're going to get into some of the main, this language of how the cosmos works. So in Ezekiel, he's got this whole thing about, they call it the Merkabah, which he's seeing wheels within wheels, and it's got all these eyes, and he uses all this language, and most people you read and go, what's he talking about? It's impossible to read. But you can unpack it, because as you constantly understand the theology and the images and the symbols of the words are representing. But within these wheels within wheels, which is a whole way, it's so interesting. I was looking at a gyroscope, this whole way, these worlds, like I said, the world that we interface, Asiya, our Ruach, our Nefesh, or even our higher soul lives, which we really probably never come into contact with in this lifetime. Very few people get to the point of being so Sadiq. Okay, and they are this is the Mazar, but there's the ox, the eagle, the man, like he sees these faces. Now, face is a word that is used to dimensions. All right, so there's an eagle and an ox and a man, and they're all kind of interfacing and mingling with each other. This is the best way that they have come up with to describe these processes that are constantly overlapping and sometimes integrating, sometimes being on opposite ends. This is such an interesting, but my point is they represent in the four cardinal points. So this is where you talk, when they talk about the corners of the world, oh my gosh, the corners of the earth, it's not talking about literally out there. There are corners that you can find, right angle, hard, solid, the corners. This is a concept. Refers to the four zodiacal cornerstone houses. In other words, you take 12 constellations, you lump them together into groups of 3, and out of 3, because there's 12, you get 4. You get 4 cardinal points. They call it north, south, east, and west. And this also correlates to each one of these zodiacal, when the sun and the moon and the cycle is going through these different cardinal houses. So you get seasons. So that's why you get spring and summer and winter and fall. So what we have to understand is they are talking, and so much of this information is lost to us. I mean, Daniel, when they say he was a master astrologer / astronomer in the ancient worlds, these concepts used to they were part of the same quote unquote science, because they understood and could read the heavens. Only very small pieces of this have come down to us, all right? So that, when we talk about the woman clothed in the sky with 12 stars and the moon at her feet and the sun, all this stuff. This is a constellational alignment, all right? And unfortunately, I know people are trying desperately to unpack it, but the text that you would have to read, because most of these people won't even go into the house of Judah to find out and to access these texts where these master sages' minds that have been keeping this information down through the ages. I mean, it's mind-boggling. But anyways, back to the point. These are talking about this world that was made on the 4th day, this world of time, this Gilgal, these circles, these spheres, this whole world of the heavens. And I think you're getting from the 3rd, 4th, 5th heavens, this whole world that is part of this whole zodiacal constellational thing. You know, what does it say? The heavens declare the glory of Yahweh. I mean, that's a fact. So this has to be incorporated. So when you're heliocentric, which sun, theologically, are you putting at the center of that thing? All right? Which, according to Philo and me, and the way I read the text and everything, isn't not even the center. All right? The center, which isn't probably really even in the center, because it's in the heart. It's, you gotta, you know, because when you have to take into account the totality of this thing. All right, so that was just a trying to unpack a little bit of the starting point analogies of talking about the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the right side and the left side, what it is all about. Now let me just make a couple of quick last points. This is how, so again, like I said, understanding how these words are used. Let me get rid of this tree of life. Here's another one in Philo, point 3, in his questions and answers on Genesis. He says, what is the meaning of a saying? A fountain went up from the earth, all right, to water the garden. I mean, again, paradise and the Gan Eden, these are all highly mystical, ultimately, terms, and watered all the face of the earth. So in other words, a fountain went up from the earth and watered all the face of the earth. Now, the rational mind, the carnal mind says, come on, how can that be? How can one river water everything, the top of a mountain all the way down to a little bed of grass? That's not possible. You know, this is what happens. The carnal mind is trying to figure out, how does that work? You know, and because they're not having the picture come from a parabolic understanding that incorporates everything, they get bogged down in trying to make, you know, a round pegs fit into a square hole. Anyways, I don't think I said that right, but anyways. But here's the question, is how it could be that the whole earth was watered by one fountain, all right? Not only kind of its size, but because of the inequality of the mountain. So a lot of people will use that as, and what's another one? I mean, there's so many of these trip-ups where they'll say, oh, every eye's going to see him, you know, before really a lot of technology, you know, people are figuring, well, yeah, right, how's every eye going to see Yeshua when he comes? I mean, how's that possibly possible? You know, and in the natural, you try to figure it out. He said, unless, and this is how they use the words, unless just as the whole force of the king's cavalry is called the horse, so the whole multitude of the veins of the earth which supplied drinkable water may perhaps be called the fountain. Okay, in the Bible, it talks about the horse and the rider. Okay, common little idiomatic expression, and lo and behold, we've never really understood what it's referring to. It is always referring to the king and his cavalry, the horse and the rider. The rider is the king. The horse refers to all of the resources at his disposal. All right, so when Pharaoh, the horse and the rider, were thrown into the sea, we're talking about, you know, Pharaoh and all his armies. And when he was defeated, even bigger in this, when he was defeated, all of the resources that he had by having a huge army was just wiped out of the question, gone. Okay, he was totally demoted to just, you know. So this is how it's important to understand how these words are. So the fountain, but there's an even bigger principle in this that's interesting. This expression is particularly appropriate because it says that the fountain watered not the whole earth, but its face. Okay, as the living being, as in the living being, it waters the chief and predominant part, the mind or the countenance. So in other words, and see, it watered, this is how every single Hebrew word, I say everything has to be, is understood in nuance, the face of the earth, all right, the face. And then let's keep unpacking this. But by the face, it is talking about the chief and predominant parts, which is the mind the countenance. All right, so these fountains, okay, let me finish the last sentence. Since that is the most important part of the earth, which can be good and fertile and productive, and that is the part which stands in need of nourishment and fountains. Okay, in other words, the world, is divided into the bountiful parts of the world and the deserts. You don't need water in the desert, because water or the desert is not going to bloom. It doesn't have within its soil, it doesn't have now. This is why it gets into so interesting, where a rose will bloom in the desert. All right, and this is the whole point, really, of how the whole plan of salvation is going to work out, so that a rose, a soul, can bloom from the parched places of the earth, where all Israel, the lost sheep, can bloom where they are planted in the Gentile nations, because of Yeshua being the fountain of life and opening up this whole source, this whole access to these living waters. I mean, there's just no end to the correct analogies that can be produced once you get the correct template. So anyways, when you get back into this whole, my last point's about, because I would love to dialogue with some knowledgeable, and try to enlarge the tent. Let's incorporate some of these mystical understandings into the big picture, so that you can be ahead of Hasatan, because he's always trying to put us in a trap. He's always trying to lay a snare. He's always trying to lay a trap. And he knows that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. That because we don't have this knowledge and this understanding, that we're going to fall short. All right, so anyways, in this, there's a verse in, all right, let me just stop with this one thing. The princes, what was this verse I was looking at? The mountains. Oh, I know. Then one of the proof texts I will say is Romans, I believe it's Romans 12:5. No, that's not it. Where the devil took Yeshua up to a high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the earth. And they're saying, well, in order for him to see all the kingdoms, he's got to be seeing flat. He's got to be able to see. See, and it has nothing to do with that, okay? Because we're back into this concept of the tree rings of Gilgal, of time cycling. And those kingdoms are seen from a high mountain. They're seen, actually, mountains refers to Sephrith, okay? To get above the level of the sun, moon, and stars, the fourth day, then you've got to get into the mindset or the understanding of a higher Sephrith, what's above that, all right? So when he took him to a high mountain, he took him to a place of where you're above time and you can see down the road. See, time in one sense is sort of linear, because it is a point of destination. We are going somewhere in this time thing, and it is taking a long time. But that the implication here, when he taken him to show him, it's meaning on a high mountain, he is above the sun, moon, and the stars, and he can look at time down the road, way to all the kingdoms. It isn't just the kingdoms of this world. It's all the different beast kingdoms that are going to rule over all Israel. This is the whole point with Nebuchadnezzar, and when he had his dream of the tree of life, because he had exalted himself. He was just a player, one of the lower Elohims, over Babylon, over a certain, how do we call this, field? You got Egypt and Babylon. Those are also code words for, and he exalted himself, and he had to be totally humbled, and he had to become like a beast and go out there and eat the grass of the field. And like, okay, look, unless you will acknowledge me, I'm running the show here, and you're my player, you're my puppet master. You do it the way I said. This is Elohim talking to Nebuchadnezzar. All right, I'm going to totally take you off your position. You're going to, and this is the point. So, and what he was shown was one of the of all the beast kingdoms that we're going to rule over. And the beast kingdoms refers to really angelic orders, which refers to other Elohims that are all going to have a shot at, basically, to some extent, ruling over all Israel in her exile, and there's another word, exile and dispersion. All right, so that's what the mountains are referring to. The earth The pillars, the last one I have to go into is, this kind of, in 1 Samuel 2:8, there's a verse, all right, that the world is founded upon pillars. First of all, the word pillars is really a bad translation. Many of the translations don't use that word, but the word is really molten images, all right? And this gets back into the concept of what is a molten image or a false idol, okay? But what this is talking about, this is talking about the world of Yetzirah, which is the next world up from the world of Asiya physicality. You get into this astral world, you get into the world of the soul, the world of the emotions, the world of the Ruach, and in there, when the word molten is used because it talks about the world of formation. There are beginning to be, there are so, that's what it's referring to, all right? Then this is referring to on the Sephirithic tree of life, the two legs, all right? The pillars refer to these two places on the Sephirithic tree. It's called the world of Yetzirah, and it is the world of formation, and it is the world just above the world of Asiya. So it is the foundation for Asiya, for the earth. It all has this is what we're talking about, okay? You're never going to get a spaceship out there to look back at the earth, whatever, and see concrete pillars. The natural mind that cannot comprehend these things because it is not elevated enough. It's not high enough. It is not spiritually discerning these things. On that note, I'm just going to quit. So we'll see what kind of, I'm certainly not I'm just trying to enter into the dialogue, elevate the dialogue with what I know, and see where we can go. Shalom, blessings, and may we all be sustained by the heart of the tree of life.